Okay, it's Miss Abney from McWillie. I'm a Montessori 6 to 9 teacher, and I'm going to be sharing the book Funny Funny Lyle by Bernard Waber with you. This is a very good book. It is about a crocodile and his mother. So listen closely and let's find out what happens with Lyle. Swish, swash, splash, swoosh, strange sounds come from the house on East 88th Street. Can it be Lyle? Lyle the crocodile, enjoying his bath? Actually, not this time. This time it's Lyle's mother, and having a good bath at that. Soaking in a tub of sudsy rainbow bubbles is by far her greatest pleasure. Although she has only just arrived from the land of the crocodile, Lyle's mother is already very much at home living with Mr. and Mrs. Prim, their son Joshua, and Lyle, especially Lyle. She is on the happiest of terms with the bird, and she enjoys good long visits with Loretta, the cat next door. And now she even has a name, Felicity. It's so awkward always having to speak of her as Lyle's mother, Mrs. Prim remarked one day. She needs to have her own name. Everyone began suggesting names. Joshua suggested Tabitha, but Lyle's mother made a face when she heard the name Tabitha. How about Nile, said Mr. Prim. Nile, said Mrs. Prim. As in Nile the crocodile, said Mr. Prim. Lyle's mother made another face, a really scornful face this time. How about Felicity, said Mrs. Prim. It means happiness, and certainly she has brought only happiness to this house. Lyle's mother smiled, a big, big smile. She even did a handstand to show her approval. She likes it, everyone cried out at once. Then Felicity it must be, said Mr. Prim. And so, from that day, Lyle's mother was called Felicity, a name of her own choosing. But to Lyle, she could only be mother. Mother, the very sound of the word filled him with joy. Lyle was so proud of his mother. He was proud of her beauty and her enormous talent for making everyone smile and feel merry wherever she went. Lyle especially liked the hours he spent alone with his mother when Mr. and Mrs. Prim were away at work and Joshua at school. Just the two of them doing their chores. Lyle always washed the breakfast dishes. He rubbed and he scrubbed and he dipped and he splashed. Felicity cared for the plants and arranged fresh guest towels. She always favored ones with bright, colorful, flowered prints. And together, they waited for Joshua to return home from school so they could all play until dark. Oh, the world was a wonderful place, thought Lyle, and he couldn't think of anything he wanted to change. Still, changes were taking place. For one thing, several new locks were necessary to safeguard the house. And a sign in the window read, "Beware of crocodiles." You can't be too careful, Mr. Prim said, shaking his head sadly. Lyle wondered what he would do if a robber broke into the house. He practiced making mean, ferocious faces. He growled, and he scowled, and he snarled, and he hissed, and he scared himself half to death. But there were other, more happy changes. Felicity, Lyle and I have something most important to tell both of you, said Mrs. Prim one day. Everyone sat down, and Mrs. Prim smoothed her skirt while she gathered her thoughts. "Well," she began at last, "what do you suppose will be happening around here?" Lyle stared at Mrs. Prim and could not suppose whatever it was he was supposed to be supposing. Mrs. Prim began. Well, actually, all of us, dears, we're going to have a robbery, thought Lyle, his eyes widening. A baby, said Mrs. Prim. Aren't you surprised? They shook their heads yes, and were indeed surprised. Very surprised. Isn't it wonderful? Mrs. Prim exclaimed, throwing her arms around Lyle and his mother and rocking back and forth with them. Oh, Felicity and Lyle, she cried, I know you both will be so much help when the baby arrives. Lyle was surprised, all right. For the next several days, all he could think about was the baby. He tried to picture the Prim's baby and himself taking care of it. He would walk the baby proudly. And he would feed the baby too. And babysit. And he would comfort the baby if it cried. This is what he would do if the baby cried. He would cradle the baby in his arms and gently rock it and coo to it and make silly faces, silly crocodile faces, until the baby would laugh and be happy again. Lyle smiled just thinking about it, and now could hardly wait for the baby to be born. Months went by as preparations for the baby's arrival moved cheerfully along. Everyone helped paint the nursery. Because he was the tallest, Lyle did the ceiling. And there was shopping to do. One day, Mrs. Prim, Felicity, and Lyle went to a big store to buy clothes for the baby. Felicity, who had never been to a store, was immediately drawn to the perfumes. Poof, poof, she joyously sprayed herself. Poof, poof, she went eagerly from bottle to bottle. Mrs. Prim and Lyle could hardly coax her away. Finally, they did coax her and were about to leave the store when suddenly everyone was surprised to hear angry voices scream out, "Stop! Stop, thief!" And just as suddenly, they were even more surprised to see two men race up to Felicity and rip apart her shopping bag. Out tumbled bottle after bottle of perfume and cologne. "Madam," shouted one of the men, "this is stolen property. You are under arrest." "Oh, Felicity," cried Mrs. Prim. Felicity could not understand what was happening. She thought the men were rude and needful of lessons in good manners. She began swatting at them with her purse. Thereupon, the men leaped on Felicity. Lyle rushed to her rescue and everyone tossed, tussled, and tangled all over the floor. Soon after, the police arrived. Mrs. Prim and Lyle stood helplessly by as Felicity was hustled away. First to be fingerprinted, and then photographed, and finally locked up for the night. And all through that long and difficult night, no one in the house slept. The entire family stayed awake, fretting and dearly missing Felicity, especially Lyle. The next morning, Felicity stood before a judge. "So, Felicity," said the judge, "you have broken the law, and now you must pay." "Please, Judge," said Mrs. Prim, "Felicity is new to our ways. She wouldn't know about stealing." "Well, then," said the judge, "so that she will learn the difference between the good life and the bad, I sentence Felicity to no less than 6 months of work of her own choosing that must serve the needs of others." Felicity chose to help out at the hospital. Although he admired how well his mother looked in her new crisp uniform, Lyle was sad watching her leave for work each morning with Mr. and Mrs. Prim. Felicity soon decided she liked and would continue to work. Work she was superb at doing. And yet she too was saddened all the long day away from her son. But what was a mother to do? One day, Lyle accompanied Felicity to her job. When he saw how expertly she cared for her patients, Lyle was never more proud of his mother, and he spent the rest of the day helping her. In time, Lyle almost got used to his mother's absence. Each day, he looked forward to playing with Joshua and their friends. And there was something else to look forward to, a most exciting, most wonderful something, the birth of the baby. Although it seemed to Lyle the baby was taking its good, sweet time getting on with the business of being born. One night, Lyle woke up with a start. He was certain he heard footsteps on the stairs. And suddenly, he was even more certain those very same footsteps belonged to robbers. Robbers in the house. Lyle knew exactly what he had to do. Bravely, he put on his most ferocious face and prepared to battle the robbers. He even surprised himself. He was so brave. He huffed and he puffed and he flung himself out the door. And almost fell upon Mr. and Mrs. Prim and Felicity. "Lyle," said Mrs. Prim, "we were just coming to tell you. It's time. Time for the baby to be born. And how good to have our own nurse Felicity go with us to the hospital," said Mr. Prim. Presently, a sleepy-eyed Joshua joined them. "Goodbye, dears," said Mrs. Prim. "See you soon after the baby arrives." Lyle watched the Prims and Felicity hail a taxi and set off for the hospital. Suddenly, he was happy about the baby, and happy, too, about himself for being so brave, even if there were no robbers. The next day, everyone was at the hospital. A beaming Mrs. Prim was already sitting up, while Felicity showed off the most beautiful baby Lyle had ever seen. "Joshua, Lyle," said Mrs. Prim, "meet Miranda Prim." Everyone smiled at the baby, especially Lyle. The end. And that was Funny Funny Lyle, written by Bernard Waber. Thank you for watching.